I remember the exact moment I realized I had been wrong about people my entire life. It wasn't a big argument or some dramatic betrayal. It was something much quieter, almost invisible. Someone smiled at me, and for the first time, I didn't believe it. Before we begin, please support MindShift Stories by subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories with the world. I used to think I understood people pretty well. Not perfectly, of course, but enough to get by. I could usually tell who was confident, who was insecure, who was genuine, and who wasn't. At least, that's what I believed. I worked at a mid-sized marketing office in Chicago. Nothing too exciting. Same faces, same routines. Coffee machine conversations, polite nods in hallways, occasional small talk about weekends that nobody really cared about. There was this guy, Daniel. He sat 2 desks away from me. Always calm, always polite. The kind of person everyone described as easy to work with. He smiled often, laughed at the right moments, never raised his voice. Honestly, if you had asked me back then, I would have said he was one of the most stable people in the office. And I liked that. I trusted that. I remember thinking, people like him make life easier. Simple, predictable, safe. At least that's how it looked. One afternoon, we were assigned to work together on a presentation. Nothing unusual, just another project. But something small happened that stuck with me. We were reviewing slides, and I pointed out a mistake. It wasn't a big deal, just a number that didn't match the data. Daniel paused. For a second, too long for something so minor. Then he smiled and said, "Good catch." That was it. But something about it felt off. I remember thinking, why did that feel uncomfortable? There was no argument, no tension, just a normal interaction. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something. Over the next few days, I started noticing little things, not big enough to call out, just patterns. Whenever someone corrected him, even gently, he would respond the same way. Smile, nod, agree. But his body would tighten slightly, his shoulders would lift just a bit, his voice would become a little too controlled. It was subtle, most people wouldn't notice. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have either, if not for that first moment. I remember thinking, maybe he just doesn't like being wrong, which felt normal, everyone dislikes that. But then I noticed something else. He started double-checking everything before sharing it. Asking for reassurance, rephrasing simple questions like he was trying to avoid making mistakes. It didn't match the version of him I had in my head. Confident, easygoing, unbothered. This was different. One evening, we stayed late to finish that presentation. The office was quiet. Most people had already left. At some point, I casually said, "You're really careful with your work." I meant it as a compliment. He paused again. That same pause. Then he laughed softly and said, "Yeah, I guess I don't like getting things wrong." There was something in the way he said it. Not defensive, not joking either, just honest. And for some reason, I asked, "Why?" I didn't plan to, it just came out. He looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Because people remember when you mess up, even if they don't say it. That stayed with me. Not because it was shocking, but because it sounded practiced. Like it wasn't just a thought, it was a belief. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started replaying conversations in my head, not just with him, but with other people too. Moments where someone seemed overly agreeable, times when someone stayed quiet, situations where reactions felt slightly delayed. I began to notice how often I had assumed things about people without questioning them. If someone smiled, I assumed they were okay. If someone stayed quiet, I assumed they had nothing to say. If someone agreed, I assumed they meant it. It was automatic, effortless, and possibly completely wrong. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. We had a team meeting. The manager criticized part of our project, specifically something Daniel had worked on. It wasn't harsh, just standard feedback. Daniel nodded, took notes, said, "That makes sense." Same as always. But this time, I was paying attention. Not to what he said, but to everything else. His hands were clenched under the table, his breathing slightly uneven, his eyes fixed on the notebook like he was avoiding something. And suddenly, it hit me. He wasn't calm. He was controlling himself. That realization stayed with me long after the meeting ended, because it forced me to question something uncomfortable. How many people around me were doing the same thing? How many calm people were actually anxious? How many confident people were just good at hiding doubt? How many nice people were afraid of being disliked? I started observing more carefully, not judging, just noticing. And the more I paid attention, the more patterns I saw. People weren't what they appeared to be. They were what they had learned to present. A week later, Daniel and I were walking out of the office together. It was one of those quiet moments where conversations feel optional, but I decided to say something. I told him, I used to think you were just naturally relaxed. He smiled. I get that a lot. I hesitated, then said, but I don't think that's it anymore. He didn't respond immediately. We kept walking. After a few seconds, he said, "What do you think it is?" I took a breath. "I think you've just gotten really good at not showing when you're not." He stopped walking. Not dramatically, just paused. Then he nodded slightly. "Yeah, that's probably true." That conversation changed something for me. Not just about him, but about everyone. I realized I had been looking at people like finished stories. Like what I saw on the surface was the full picture. But it wasn't. It was just the part they were willing or able to show. After that, I started questioning my assumptions more often. When someone seemed rude, I wondered what pressure they might be under. When someone stayed quiet, I considered what they might be holding back. When someone smiled too quickly, I asked myself what they might be hiding. Not in a suspicious way, just with curiosity. And something interesting happened. People didn't change, but my perception of them did, and that changed everything. I remember one specific moment. A coworker snapped at me during a stressful day. Before, I would have taken it personally, maybe even responded the same way. But this time, I paused. I remembered Daniel. I remembered that tight smile. And instead of reacting, I just said, "Rough day?" She sighed immediately, like something had been released. "Yeah, sorry." That was it. No conflict, no tension, just understanding. That's when it really clicked for me. Most of what we see in people isn't who they are. It's how they've learned to cope. Their reactions, their tone, their behavior, it's often shaped by things we can't see. Past experiences, quiet fears, unspoken expectations. And we walk around interpreting all of it at face value, making decisions, forming opinions, building narratives based on incomplete information. I used to think understanding people meant reading their actions. Now I think it's about questioning them. Not out loud, but internally. What else could this mean? What might I be missing? What if this isn't what it looks like? Those questions change the way I see everything. I still think about that first moment sometimes. That slight pause, that subtle discomfort. It seems so small, but it opened something I didn't even know was closed. Now, when I meet someone new, I don't rush to figure them out. I let the uncertainty stay. Because I've learned that people are rarely as simple as they seem. And maybe they're not supposed to be. Sometimes I wonder how many times I've misunderstood someone without realizing it. How many judgments I made too quickly. How many stories I created in my head that weren't true. And then I think about this. If everyone is walking around carrying things we can't see, masking things we don't notice, reacting from places we don't understand, then what does it really mean to know someone? Maybe the real shift isn't in understanding others perfectly. Maybe it's in realizing that we never fully can, and choosing to be a little more careful, a little more patient, and a little more open because of that.